After getting my hair done and pampering myself, I went out on a shopping spree and bought myself a couple of new dresses. When I came back home, I realized the state of my house because I hadn't cleaned in ages, so I had to hire a cleaning service to do the job as well. I wasn't embarrassed in the slightest since I knew what I'd been through. I think anyone who'd found out that they were basically infertile, had their husband cheat on them, lost both their parents, and also lost their job in the span of just a couple of weeks would have been gone by now. Once my house was clean and I was finally looking like a human being again, I started looking for therapists who could help me because I realized that I was probably clinically depressed. The shopping spree and spa had helped a little, but it was just temporary. If I wanted to get out of this mess, I needed professional help, and I wasn't ready to go back to the condition I was in for so long. Along with looking for therapists, I also started looking for jobs and made sure to explain my circumstances to my ex-employers in case I needed recommendation letters. To my surprise, my ex-boss ended up inviting me back to work if I was up for it. She said her son was an advocate for mental health awareness and would be disappointed if she didn't at least give me an opportunity to get my life back on track. She also offered to put me in touch with her son, who worked with a lot of great mental health professionals, to help make my search for a good therapist easier. I agreed to all of it and am truly and sincerely thankful that she turned out to be such a wonderful woman. I got my job back and started seeing a therapist as soon as I settled on one. I've been attending therapy sessions every week for almost a month now, and I feel like I'm finally getting better. The only thing I hadn't done so far was file for divorce from Jeff because I didn't think I wanted to leave this marriage just yet. I really had faith that he'd come back. Also, I'd forgotten about the divorce because I was depressed about my life, so I didn't think about it and just waited around like an idiot. Then, about 4 days ago, I received a call from him. Usually, I don't answer calls from anyone, but since it was Jeff, I got really excited and answered. I had barely spoken to anyone or even heard my voice, but I was happy to hear from him because I was delusional enough to believe that he was calling to get back together. It had been almost 4 months since he left the house and we last spoke, and in the meantime, a lot had happened. I was finally doing better now, so I hoped that his coming back to me would be the beginning of a fresh start for both of us. He even hinted at it by inviting me to dinner at a restaurant we loved going to when we were together, and I agreed to see him there. I got all dressed up and went out to see him that evening. I even hugged him when I saw him, and he looked happy to see me too, but he didn't ask me any questions and jumped straight into talking about his own life and how fabulous it had been for the last couple of months. He told me that he'd been traveling ever since he left me and had seen a number of beautiful places and met numerous people. He mentioned that his old friend, with whom he'd had the affair, had convinced him to go away for some soul-searching. He brought it up casually, but he was speaking about it in the past tense, so I thought maybe it was done with. I even asked him if they were together, and he laughed and said no because she was too busy to commit to a relationship, and he didn't want one just yet. I was relieved, but like an idiot, I didn't even bother to think that just because they weren't together, it didn't mean they didn't still have a thing. The reasons he'd given me were that they were too busy and non-committal to be together, not that they didn't like each other. I was so happy to see him that I missed a lot of the things he was saying and convinced myself that he was back for me and we'd live happily ever after. By the end of the evening, I was shocked when he didn't ask anything about me and didn't apologize for anything. But I still stayed, hoping something would happen. We made a lot of small talk, and after we'd ordered dessert, I finally decided to steer the conversation towards our relationship and ask him how he dealt with our separation. He told me that it had probably been easier for him than for me, and then touched my hand and said he knew I'd lost both parents within days of each other. A couple of my friends had learned about it from my mother's Facebook feed and then told him about it. I was shocked because I thought he hadn't known, and that's why he hadn't brought it up. I thought that's why he hadn't bothered to call me or even visit me. When I realized that he'd known all along, all the warning bells started going off in my head at full volume. He'd known and still hadn't cared enough to come see me and make sure I was okay. Forget about visiting me, he hadn't even tried to contact me to make sure I was fine. That was the first shock. Then he went on talking and told me he was really sad to learn about the demise of my parents because he really liked them, but he was too busy traveling to contact me and figured he'd do it once he was back. I smiled and said nothing because I was trying to process it in my head. Then he told me he'd also wanted to talk to me about something he'd been thinking about for a long time, which was also the reason he'd asked me out to dinner. I thought this was finally where he would ask me to get back together, but instead, he asked if I'd given any thought to what I'd want to keep during the divorce. When I looked confused and asked what he was talking about, he explained that since it had been a long time since we broke up, he thought it was finally time to file for divorce officially so we could move on with our lives. That's when I finally realized this wasn't a dinner date where we would end up getting back together but one where we would officially end our marriage. It was more of a goodbye dinner than anything else, and I, like an absolute idiot, had completely misread the situation.